Greetings from the set of Metro and More at Metropolitan Community College, serving more than 50,000 students with over 120 programs at our 8 locations in the daytime, evening, weekends, or online. Hi everybody, I'm your host Kent Pavelka. Welcome again to Metro and More. More of what you need to know about Metropolitan Community College. Our discussion just ahead is all about Black History Month at Metropolitan Community College with our guest, Dr. Marcy Watson Vandiver, who is Assistant Professor of Urban Education at Towson University. Dr. Watson Vandiver's presentation was entitled Unshackled: Education for Freedom, Student Achievement, and Personal Emancipation. Dr. Watkins Vandiver, nice to have you on the show.
Nice to be here.
And on campus. Appreciate your willingness to chat with us today. So, you're not a stranger to Omaha, Nebraska. Tell us a little bit about your personal background. You're rooted right here.
Yeah,
right?
I moved to Omaha when I was 1, and I attended Picot Elementary, which is on 144th and Blondo, all during elementary school. I think I was the first class to go to Picot. I was the inaugural class, and then I went to Beveridge Middle School for middle school, and then I went to Marion for high school, and I moved my senior year.
My kids went to Beveridge, so
yeah.
I'm very familiar.
Yeah.
So, Marion High School, boy, that's geographically, that's jumping around from 100 and, what'd you say, where's?
144th and Blondo.
Yeah.
I lived in that neighborhood, and then I moved at the end of middle school to 120th and I think Military.
Gotcha.
Which is, a little bit closer to Marion.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So after Marion, talk about your educational background and how you ended up with your PhD.
So I moved my senior year, it was a big heartbreak, to Georgia, South Georgia.
So you didn't finish at Marion?
No, I didn't. I did freshman, sophomore, junior year. I didn't finish. I ended up going to another Catholic school when I moved to Georgia. Moved to Macon, Georgia my senior year, and ended up going to college there. I went to Mercer University. And then after that, I went to, I started teaching in Atlanta, and I taught for Atlanta Public Schools for a few years, and I got my master's at Georgia State, and then I got my PhD in Charlotte. But the funny thing about Marion is that although I didn't graduate from there, that's where my roots were, and so I still attend all the class reunions like I graduated.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that's
they're very nice for doing that, yes.
No family left here, but lots of friends.
Yes, lots of friends.
So how did it come that your folks moved around?
So my father was the pastor at Salem, and he ended up getting another church in South Georgia.
Very
so
good. So what years are we talking about here? You were here and when?
I was here from 1988 to 2004.
I got you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so what was the difference in environment from Omaha, Nebraska to Macon, Georgia?
That's a great question. So in the Midwest, I had a pleasant school experience. I'll talk about it, tonight. I had a pleasant school experience. Went to a great school, went to Beveridge, and Marion is unmatched. It was a great high school. What I noticed in the South is that race was a lot more overt. It was the first time I saw Confederate flags waving. I was 16, 17. So it was a lot more overt in some of the racial issues. Not to say that the Midwest is isolated from that, but I definitely noticed that race mattered in the South in comparison to the Midwest, where I feel like my socioeconomic status mattered, like the ability to go to Marion and have friends in other Catholic schools. So yeah, those were the, I guess, demographic differences. But quality of schools, a lot of people in the U.S. brag about Nebraska's education, and I was well prepared when I went to Georgia. You see a lot more disparities in the South as far as educational access and all of those things. So I enjoyed both regions for different reasons. I definitely grew up here, but I became an adult in the South, and I had new adult realities in the South. So I liked both experiences, definitely.
So maybe a function partly of your age is why you were sensitive to the difference in
definitely.
the racial issues, for example.
Definitely. And my eyes were open because I was older. I can ask the tough questions in class, and I can ask my parents the tough questions, like what is that? I mean, I knew what the flag was, but why are people waving it? Like those kind of hard questions that I guess a high schooler would start asking. And the weather's different. I should have mentioned that. The weather is definitely different.
Yeah, you're here visiting, and it's you're now you're in the
On the
Northeast,
East Coast,
so you're still
definitely
understand the weather here.
Definitely.
So beyond, being assaulted with the reality of the Confederate flag, what kinds of things are you talking about that were kind of a shock to you in terms of the difference between here and there?
I think it's best described here. Your family's income and economics can kind of give you good opportunities. It can give you a private or parochial opportunity. In the South, there were issues that your family's economics couldn't get you out of. Like you can't explain or remove police officer prejudice and that kind of thing. So those types of, these people feel this way, and it doesn't matter that my father's a pastor and my mom, graduated from college, and we have a nice little family, and they're from the South, and it's this Southern family.
Kind of like you're talking about issues like driving while black. And
Definitely, yeah. Driving while black, or just understanding, like people following you in the store when you want to go get something. Like if I wanted to go to the little trinket store and buy a bracelet, someone like following you, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That you can see that everywhere in the U.S. I definitely want to make that clear. You see that everywhere in the U.S., but I noticed, and it might have to do with my age, I noticed in the South, race mattered more than who I was. You know what I mean? Like, and that's the climate, and history explains that. But that was the climate, and I definitely found pockets of friendly people, but it was just definitely a culture shock. And it was South Georgia, so it wasn't Atlanta. I always joke to people, Atlanta's not Georgia. It's not the South. Atlanta's not the South. It's an urban city that's a metropolis, and diversity is very vibrant there. I moved south of that.
Is that Macon?
Macon.
Yeah.
There were counties nearby in Macon where President Obama was elected. They didn't print that in the paper, like that kind of.
Really?
Yes. It was a little bit more rural than where I was, but you move into these homelands where racism is still vibrant, so yeah. And that was a high school reality, definitely. As a child, I wonder if I moved as a child, would I notice it?
So how did that make you feel?
I had a lot of questions, and I definitely had a lot of questions with my parents. They're both Jim Crow generation, born in 1960, lived in Arkansas and Mississippi. They knew that. I mean, they knew it. They were fine.
Did they prepare you for it?
I don't think I had a conversation beforehand, but
They knew you'd have some questions
yeah,
later.
yes, and the type of family that I grew up in, I always asked the questions, sometimes uncomfortable questions, and they were definitely, sensitive to those things. And like I said, I was in a private school when I got there, so I ended up getting around communities of people that were understanding and were, progressive thinking and that kind of thing. I had good friends when I got there, but just driving to the grocery store, just some of the neighborhoods that you see, it was definitely different than the Midwest, definitely.
And I interrupted you. How did you feel about that? I mean, was it like a culture shock?
It's definitely culture shock, weather shock and culture shock, definitely. It was definitely a culture shock, and then other things, and that's probably why I got into teaching. I noticed the disparities in school. So when I moved there, I started tutoring at a church, like an after-school program, and I noticed students couldn't read on grade level. Students couldn't form correct sentences, or sentences that would help them pass a test. They were a lot more behind than what I noticed in the Midwest. Now I have to always say this: I was probably also protected up here. I was in West Omaha in the '90s, so I had good access to good schooling. But in the South, tutoring in a low-income rural community, you see disparities that was nothing like I'd ever seen, which launched me into teaching. It launched me into that.
Maybe one of the nuances is just the sheer numbers and percentages
Definitely.
of people that had problems like that.
Yeah,
compared
definitely.
To here.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So what did you focus on in your undergrad, grad?
Got it. In undergrad, I got a degree in middle grades education. So I knew I didn't want the itty bitties. I knew I didn't want high schoolers, so I picked the middle, and everyone thought it was crazy, but I really liked this middle, adolescent, pubescent area. And so I did middle grades education, and the two subjects that I got certification in were language arts and social studies. And I wanted to either teach history or language arts. For my master's, and this was kind of cultivated once I got in the classroom in Atlanta, I realized that there were policies that needed to change in Atlanta. So I got a degree in educational leadership and policy right there at Georgia State. It was about 20 minutes from where I worked. after getting that degree, I still was dissatisfied. I still had indignation about some of the things that I was seeing. I was still in the South, so we still had disparities. Atlanta was a city which is a little bit different than some of the rural things I saw in Macon. But I noticed in Atlanta public schools, and I started teaching in Atlanta public schools right after, I don't know if you remember the testing crisis, like the scandal in
Yes.
Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
I started teaching right after that. I started teaching there in the cleanup years, and I noticed that some of the policies were still, I don't want to say corrupt, but they weren't servicing students. And I knew that I had to get an advanced degree to be invited to the table to talk about these
So
issues.
you might just take a half minute to explain, recap what that.
Atlanta?
Yeah.
So, as most people know, Atlanta Public Schools had a testing scandal. So Georgia is one of those states where standardized assessments are high stakes, which means that the states get money. If
Right.
you have high performing schools, principals get a kickback if their school is high achieving and that kind of thing. So there was a scandal where
Basic fraud, basically. Yeah.
basically, I think the charges were like embezzlement of federal funds and that kind of thing. So they were found, years before I got there, different schools and principals were found to have cheated on the tests. And so I got hired right when they were caught and they were doing cleanup and they were firing left and right, and I was one of the new batch of people to come in. And when you have a district like that that has some of those issues, and there were other districts, I think like Philly and other districts that were found to have some of the same things. When you have districts with deep-rooted problems, as a teacher, you want to start solving them. You want to
Sure.
start solving the classroom level. You get all these district meetings, and you're like, well, I know the answers to this. And it was not until I knew I couldn't solve them on my own that I said, I need to get a PhD.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And now, Towson, what are you teaching? What is it you're teaching?
I teach two classes. I teach urban education, and I teach history for elementary school students. And they're both, I can explain them. Urban education is a general ed course. Everyone at Towson has to take a class like it. And basically it explores education and inequity, education in low-income schools, education in inner-city schools, education in poverty. It explores all of these kind of messy issues with education.
Mm-hmm.
Great class. I'm teaching a lot of those classes this semester. And then another class that I teach is strictly for education majors. So once you declare your major is going to be education, we have to teach these college kids who will one day be in the classroom how to teach certain subjects. So I teach how to teach history to little kids, which is really impactful because you could help to shape how college kids approach difficult topics in history like slavery and the civil rights movement and immigration. And you get to teach college kids how to embed multiculturalism, anti-racism, and different things. So I really like that class for a different reason. I'm dealing with teachers in that course, and the other course is more gen ed.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Towson's in Baltimore?
It's Baltimore County.
Baltimore County.
Baltimore County.
And I was enlightened back in the days when I was doing a lot of football broadcasts.
Yeah.
I always didn't know, is it Towson or Towson? And then and it's Towson, but then it was Towson State. Now it's
Yeah.
Towson University,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Definitely.
Yeah.
On my job interview, I said Towson. I
Yeah,
didn't know.
see?
I didn't
Yeah.
know.
When
Yeah.
you're doing college football scoreboard shows,
Yeah.
you know, how do I say this, you know? So your presentation here at Metro Unshackled,
Yeah.
give us, for starters, just maybe the 5-minute version of what you
Oh
had to
my
say.
goodness. So Unshackled.
Okay, 10 minutes.
Unshackled was based off of a book that I helped to co-write when I was getting my PhD. I was invited by a senior professor and other colleagues of mine to help write a book. And it was a great honor. I was definitely a rookie at the time. And we explored different moments in history where people used education for freedom. And we looked at the Maroon Society, which were Caribbean people who decided that they were not going to stand for slavery, and they rebelled, and they used education to do that. We looked at the civil rights movement, where literacy tests were important to gain their voting rights, and we looked at even contemporary issues like the La Raza Studies program in Arizona, which is happening right now, where Mexican-American students get to learn about their history in the classroom. So we looked at different ways that education has helped groups of people and what that looked like for that.
So what did you tell them regarding all that? I mean, just the history of it, or you get into more than just the
Yeah,
history.
more than that. So that actually, in my speech tonight, that's just the launching pad. I then look at some of the ways that, so the book is called Unshackled, some of the ways that even in the contemporary education system right here and nationwide, we shackle students, which is a dramatic word. A lot of people don't like that word because you think of slavery or bondage or liberation or oppression, but ways that we limit students' opportunities. And those have lifelong repercussions, ones that we will sometimes feel because if you don't educate the next generation, we will get the kickback from that. So I then talk about some of the issues going on in education today.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Who was your co-authors in Unshackled?
My dissertation chair was the lead author. He's Dr. Greg Wiggin. He was the senior professor. Had a colleague, Lakia Scott. She's now at Baylor. She was an author. I was an author. And then there was another gentleman who's still getting his PhD named Richard Reynolds. We were the 4 authors on that book.
Very good.
Yeah.
So, using the word unshackled,
Yeah.
can you talk more specifically? Unshackled from what?
Yeah.
Exactly.
To be honest, to be unshackled from, I think, systemic racism, to be unshackled from limitations that certain groups of people are not afforded, and to be unshackled from a lack of education, a lack of a bona fide education. Those are the things that throughout history and even today that students in the past, our ancestors and different people, generations before us, realized, and certain groups of people fought against. And even today, in the public school system, some students are realizing, like, I need more. I need to realize how this education can help me, and I need to use it for my own social mobility, so that I won't have to be in the same neighborhood my whole life. But it's the realization of that is part of the unshackling process.
Well, it's the beginning of it.
I know, and it's a
right?
lifelong, yeah, it's lifelong, and I have no problem admitting my privilege. It's easy for me. You know, it would be easy from a middle-class suburban family to use education to navigate life. But for someone who is less fortunate or underserved, from a lower socioeconomic status, for example, there's a lot more to navigate. You know, there's a lot more ground to cover when you are trying to get out of your situation. I'm just trying to maintain, you know, and
Sure.
if I'm honest, yeah.
Well, it seems to me that most people know this is still a problem
Yeah.
in the United States.
Yeah.
Or do you agree, or do you think that there's
don't know.
ignorance about the degree to which people are shackled still?
I think there is ignorance. I think some people are lulled to sleep in how comfortable they are, and as long as me and my kids get an education, I'm fine. I don't know if, as Americans, and I don't know if this is our culture or what, know the widespread depth of some of these issues and how we'll see these issues again if we don't solve them. And then just empathy for other people
Sure.
who live on the other side of town that we drive by with our windows up and the doors locked, like people that we're not paying attention to. I think we focus very inward and we don't look at students down the street.
That last part you're talking about is fear is involved in that.
Yeah,
You
definitely.
know, unreasonable, illogical
Absolutely.
fear. But I always go back to what you alluded to, and that is empathy for others from the standpoint of, you know, just being in a fog in your own world. I mean,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, I don't know if that's racism or not,
Yeah.
but just not being
Yeah.
sensitive to other people's reality.
Yeah.
You know, and that's human nature, I believe.
Absolutely, 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 absolutely. And I think everyone falls into that. Everyone has the propensity to do that. As long as me and my kids and my cousins and my husband and I are fine, we forget to think about the human condition of everyone in the American sense and the global sense, and that's a whole nother conversation, but just people halfway around the world who are fighting for things. I think we forget to see the human condition in that.
It's interesting, you could talk an hour on this specific point, but to some degree, I think that has to do with our system. I don't want to say, I'm not blaming the system
Yeah.
necessarily, but when it's based on capitalism and it's
Yeah.
you have to you know, you're responsible for your life.
Yeah,
That means that I'm not responsible for you.
I know.
You know?
Yeah.
So maybe it is a function of our culture.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. And even within that, even within capitalism and its effects on schooling, the competitive nature of that, like I have to rise to the top to win. And if I rise to the top, that means other people are falling to the bottom. So this separation between the have and the have-nots, especially within education, you can see it with your own eyes.
Well, how much of that, again, this specific point you just
Yeah.
made, sometimes I think, well, when we have these discussions about disparity,
Yeah.
if I were to argue that, well, you're always going to have disparity. There's always going to be, even if you improve the whole lot,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's still going to be somebody at the top and somebody at the bottom. And yet, at times, sometimes I think people think that shouldn't happen, that everybody should be on the same level, and I don't think it's possible.
Yeah. I think within schooling, making sure that resources are as equitable as
Right.
possible. That's where people go wrong. I think, and I'm going to make this point later today, but I think people think that have and have-nots, or a suburban school and an urban school, or a West Omaha school and a North Omaha school, like it's the difference between first class and coach on an airplane. That, oh, I just have more amenities, that kind of thing. And you should definitely want, the rest of the people on the plane to have the amenities that you have. You should at least give them the tools to succeed. You have them, so let's make sure they have them. Let's make sure they have textbooks and a science lab, et cetera. But the point that I'm going to make tonight is that we're not even on the same plane when we don't give kids the same resources. We're setting them up with no gasoline to go nowhere, that kind of thing. I think resources absolutely matters more than amenities. We should definitely make sure that they have the resources, but I think sometimes people think that, oh, those schools, it's just run down and it's a little old. It's like, no, it's systemic. Like, some of those schools don't have qualified teachers. They don't have books that even say George W. Bush was the president. That's how old they are. So making sure that they at least have the tools to even come to the table and eat.
And you have studied that reality. I mean, you can talk about quantitative figures here, or
Yeah.
discuss real numbers, right?
Yeah. Definitely.
So I mean, that's kind of what you do, right?
Definitely.
You don't just say this is my theory.
Yeah.
You know it's true.
No, it's definitely in the pudding. I mean, there's research that shows that having a great teacher that's qualified for 2 years makes a difference in a child's life. 2 consecutive years, if you put a good teacher in a low-income school, that makes a world of difference. And then even traversing social class. I always quote this quote, and I will do it tonight. 3 out of 4 of us, by default, will inherit our parents' social class, just by how data it works, longitudinal statistical data. 3/4 of us will have our parents' social class. In fact, you are more likely to inherit your father's social class than you are his height. Like, that's how it's a 14% difference in between your ability, your likeliness to inherit your parents' social class versus even your father's height. And if you have that type of a likelihood to end up right back in your own situation, the only thing that statistically negates that statistic is education. Education is the only thing that gives you a bump. It's the only thing that gives you a bump.
And we know this.
Yeah, we know this. We definitely know this. And I think that is why, to me, we will probably always have and have-nots, but we should at least give people the tools to try to have. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure, I do.
Definitely.
Well, I mean, you look at the metropolitan Omaha area, and
Yeah.
there are school districts where everybody's got a laptop. Everybody.
Yeah.
And then, like you said like we were talking about a while ago, that the old thing, reality comes into the play where, well, I've got mine,
Yeah.
and so I don't care really what anybody
Definitely.
else's problem
Definitely.
is. So at the same time, in school district A, where everybody's got a laptop, how many laptops are in these on the other end of the spectrum?
Absolutely.
Well, that's kind of not only a rhetorical question, but
Yeah.
how stark is the difference?
Especially in urban cities on the East Coast, which is where I am and I work, some of those schools don't have laptops. There is a school I'm working with in Baltimore. They don't have many computers at all. In a K-8 school, it's an elementary, middle school, that's like the trend on the East Coast. They have 20 working computers in that school. And not all of those computers have a working mouse or a keyboard. And so I was brought on to help them maybe write a grant or reach out to Dell or different corporations like, hey, can we just get some of your refurbished computers? But
20 for how many students?
I think the school has 586 students. So they have a laptop cart and it just rotates, and you hope you get it that month, not day. You hope you get a computer that month. Whereas and that's in Baltimore City. Whereas in Baltimore County, which is the lush area where Towson is, there's an initiative where every child has a laptop. So those types of things.
And so you could theoretically follow students from those two realities and almost predict their lives, right?
Yeah, and not based off of a computer, of course, but definitely based off of the school they attend.
Tools.
Yeah, tools, based on the tools that we give them. And there's this propensity in education to always, a lot of people are focusing when they want to reform schools. They think it is technology that we need to reform, but even bigger than that, if I can predict a child's likeliness to stay in school based on the resources that I see, including qualified teachers, access to a school psychologist or a psychiatrist, that kind of thing. Social worker. I can predict that. The school I taught in Atlanta, there was one guidance counselor that worked Tuesday, Thursday for half a day, and she rotated between 5 schools. Whereas on the other side of town, where the parents are affluent, and yes, they still need a guidance counselor, there's 2 in the building that reside there all day. So it's not even tangible resources. The mentorship and getting the social services you need are often not in the neediest schools.
Yeah, and that's not even taken into consideration what's reality at home.
Exactly.
And so in a way, when you suggest that at least we ought to have equal opportunity in terms of resources,
yeah,
people who are disadvantaged in terms of their home reality
Yeah.
probably need more resources
Definitely.
than the people that are getting the most.
Definitely. And so equity, to your point, is like the new buzzword that a lot of professors are using, and a lot of universities that reside in communities look around and realize we need to make sure that we enforce equity, whether it be fiscal or any equity. And it baffles me. I'm a young professor, so I walked into the field assuming that older professors knew all this. There's senior professors who should know this. But the simple thought that those who have the least should have more.
Yeah.
It blows my mind that that's still a concept that so many people are grappling with.
Or need more.
Need more.
Yeah.
Have to have more just to get to school. It's that embedded. And I think if we move the conversation beyond and our thinking beyond like, oh, that school is just run down. No, there are systemic things starting from home that many students don't have.
Yeah, but you can't do much about the home situation.
Yeah, but there are things in education, for example, like homeschool workers that go to people's homes, or go to local youth shelters and meet with students, that kind of thing. If you don't have a parent, then there's a person who can go out there and meet with you and make sure you're doing okay. There are some districts who realize that although we cannot control home, we can get to your home and try to provide social services. Or, for example, for the common reality with many of our students, especially high school, teenage pregnancy, having a daycare on site, those types of services that maybe a suburban school wouldn't think about. But even if I can't control your personal life, making sure that education is still as comfortable as it can for you, as lush as it can for you, like it is on the other side of town. So free daycare in the school, or a homebound worker, or a hospital-bound worker if you get into the hospital, or even like a social worker or someone who has to visit your house once a week. Those types of things too. Even if I can't control your home life, I can make sure I'm present in your home life.
Well, can you, do you have a feel for, or have you studied where we're at in terms of momentum with all these issues? Is it worse than it has been? Is it getting better? Are we treading water? Do you know?
Educational issues, let me think. School segregation is worse. So the disparities between schools have gotten worse since Brown v. Board. Student achievement has gotten worse.
Because of the segregating schools and the tax base that support them and all that stuff.
So segregating schools that have gotten worse definitely because of local property taxes and how that determines your school budget,
Right.
definitely. But also how districts zone and kind of tape off where different students will go. It's found to be more racially segregated than it was before Brown v. Board. That is a reality. Student achievement has gotten worse, and that's something I'll talk about tonight too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty depressing.
I know. I give
picture
hope.
you're
I do
painting
give
here.
hope. I do give hope. Yes.
You do?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, relative to home here, OPS, do you have a feel for where things stand and with respect to this discussion here in Omaha?
So I did my research before I came, and thank you to all the friends who answered back. I reached out, like, what are some of your needs and concerns as parents or as community members? Some of the issues are common. So there's something that I'm going to talk about tonight, but like school discipline, for example, is a nationwide issue, and that's something that's an issue here. College readiness is something that's a nationwide issue, and it's an issue here. The one thing that I think is different from Omaha to the rest of the country is testing. I know you all do testing a little bit different. It's a decentralized type of system. So whereas on the East Coast, up and down, it's standardized tests, kill and drill all day, and these national standards that people have to follow. Nebraska kind of does its own thing. So that's something that's definitely different, and we'll talk about that tonight.
Well, where do you stand on
Oh,
what's the
that's a
best
political
approach?
question. I will say this, a lot of the country, there's 8 states that don't do Common Core, which is the national curriculum initiative right now. There are 8 states that don't do it, and Nebraska is one of them, and a lot of people look to Nebraska and praise them for it, because Common Core is often a headache on the East Coast, and teachers are trying to learn it. I think there is beauty in the autonomy that Nebraska has. My issue, and the thing that I would just urge people to always pay attention to, is just make sure as different districts, as the hundreds of districts that are in Nebraska operate independently, that we are all preparing kids for a future after high school, that we are all trying to get all kids to graduate, and whatever that looks like. I think sometimes autonomy can often give you so much space to do your own thing, and kind of there may not be consistency.
We're talking accountability here.
Accountability, definitely. And I think, like I said, in every book that I read, I always underline, I see Nebraska in every educational reform book that I read, or any book that's talking about policy, because Nebraska is one of those rogue states that does its own thing. And a lot of teachers, including myself, love that about the way that Nebraska has chosen to approach curriculum. You're not buying into something that's national and just buying it just because you think you should. It seems to be a lot of research into, no, we don't want to do that.
Well, so that's, in essence, you're saying it's good not to test, but we need to test.
Yes, we always need to know where students stand. We have to have assessments. That's something I think any teacher, even children, I think, understand, like, okay, my teacher needs to know if I know this information. Every district policymaker, teacher, principal will want to know how their kids are doing, yes. The difference between Nebraska and the rest of the states that buy into these high stakes assessments is that in Nebraska, it's not high stakes to where this determines your grade promotion or determines your ability to graduate high school. For example, where I taught, if you did not pass the 10th grade test, you cannot graduate. You know what I mean? Like, that matters. You cannot get a high school diploma without passing this test.
Well, that's what we want, right?
We want students, well, this is the issue. What happens with students who do not test well and are naturally brilliant and smart? Those types of things.
Well, yeah.
You know, so that, and I think that affects all of us. I know adults, myself, I don't do it.
But we're not talking about those students. We're talking about those students that legitimately
are not going to cut the mustard.
Yeah, that don't deserve to go from 10th to 11th grade.
Definitely.
But
And
let's pass them along.
Yeah, and now social promotion, now that would be an issue that I would think that Nebraska has to pay attention to as you do your own thing, making sure that you're not just socially promoting students. You do have to stop and assess, but making sure that your state's not getting a kickback from having all these high scores, making sure that kids aren't being overly retained just because they can't pass a test. I think there's definitely a compromise in between.
Where do you think reality is nationwide with regard to pushing kids along that shouldn't be pushed along? I mean, is that a big part of the problem we're talking about?
I think by and large, nationwide, a lot of kids are held back instead of being pushed along.
And then they quit.
Yeah. They time out. You cannot, in most states, you time out at 21. And I don't know any person who would stay in 9th grade till they're 21,
Right.
that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's just the opposite of what I suggested, in other words.
Yeah.
That you are held back and
Yeah.
you give up.
Definitely.
Yeah. But either way, it's not good, right?
Yeah, either way, it's not good. You want students to achieve. I think, though, that, and this takes a lot more work, and I don't know any state who would do it, looking at a student comprehensively instead of just a test. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I think that is definitely, I think any educator would argue, like, yeah, a portfolio or some type of longitudinal assessment on just are you getting this information is definitely better than just what you can do in an hour on a Scantron sheet bubbling
Sure.
it in. That would be like the utopian ideal that of course anybody would want. But if we're in the age of testing, I think we have to be careful not to buy into some of these corporate agendas with assessments and doing all of that, and also making sure that we are not just socially promoting students. So having assessments, but finding the right place for them.
So, Unshackled, Education for Freedom, Student Achievement, and Personal Emancipation. Break those three things down and maybe address what are you speaking of in terms of for freedom?
Okay, I think historically it's a reality for many, especially African American and black people in the U.S., that you absolutely needed an education for freedom. And often it was to write your literacy papers if you were a slave, or to pass the, as I mentioned, the literacy test to get the right to vote in
Right.
Alabama.
Right.
So that is it. Education for many people has served as a ticket for freedom. Student achievement, you want students to be, as we just mentioned, we just talked about, you want them to be successful. You want them to have gone through 12 years of their life and have the necessary tools for college or post-secondary career or the trade or whatever you decide to do. And then last, personal emancipation. I think that's the most difficult one. And it's argued that you can sit in school and not personally have a connection to what you're learning. And personal emancipation to me is that moment where you realize that I have the ability to achieve the things that I want to do. I realize that there's certain history that was never told to me, but I understand where my place is on the human record. That's a much more, I want to say metaphysical, but that's a much more intangible thing. And I think some of the greatest people in history that we love to celebrate, like Carter G. Woodson, or Harriet Tubman, or Septima Clark, or Ella Baker, realized that they could personally be emancipated, just beyond being just schooled. They were educated about how the world works, and they decided to make it a better place. And that's the hardest one.
Decided is a key word there,
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
Because you can have all the tools
Yeah,
to you may be equipped to be personally emancipated,
Yeah.
but in the end, you got to decide you're going to do it.
definitely. And
Right.
that's why it's so tough. That's
Yeah.
why it's so tough. As a teacher, I used to tell people, it's so frustrating. I worked in a low-income school. It was an alternative school with a lot of students who were adjudicated in and out of the detention center. I wish I had a serum that I could inject motivation into a child. And a lot of them were motivated and they're just trying to make it. But you had some students at 14, 15 and they were clocked out. So the decision, they've given up. And I want to say this because I think it's important. And I see sometimes in their social conditions why. You know what I mean? Life is hard and they've been dealt a really bad hand. So I get it. But adults, students, everyone alike, the decision to want to free yourselves from the condition that you're living in, or just to make the world a better place because of what you've learned. I think that's tough because it's a decision. It's a decision to go out and be prosperous.
Why do you think the decision is made not to do that, to stay where I'm at?
I talked about this in my class. I taught class a couple days ago. It's hard to, when I was a teacher in Atlanta, it's hard to compete with money. I mean, a lot of, I'm going to explain it, but a lot of those students were right around the working age. I had a lot of students who were repeaters, so I had 15-year-old sixth graders and 17-year-old eighth graders. So they were around the working age. It's hard to tell them to stop. Just stay in school for 4 more years in high school, and it will make a difference when I can stop going to school, which I don't like now, and go work at Subway or go work at Burger King or anything else. It's hard to compete with a right now job. And I mean, I never grew up.
Even though there's no future in it.
Yes, but I never grew up in poverty, so I don't know what it's like to have that immediate need to pay my mother's light bill, or the immediate need, I just had a child, to make sure that I can get them some Pampers. I don't know what that feels like, and so I often have to check my privilege with how I even looked at that. It was a reality check at 21 living in Atlanta and seeing that, but I think for especially middle school, high school teachers, you can't compete with a right now job right now. Although we know it's $10 an hour,
Right.
But it's hard to. And in this delayed gratification of just give me 4 more years of school, which you already hate, and then you'll get that diploma and it'll make a world of difference. It's hard. it's hard to compete with that.
So as a result, enter into the equation some of the programs, for example, like at Metropolitan Community College, that
Yeah.
give these kinds of resources
Yeah.
for that interim period of time while
Yeah.
you get your,
Yeah.
your 2-year degree or whatever, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I mean, we've got some of that going on.
Definitely, definitely, which is a good thing. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely trying to at least meeting people in the middle versus it being education versus not, just in between, kind of meeting kids where they are as they are making those decisions.
So if you were going to present, and money were no object, if money is all you need, how do we begin to resolve all this? What are the priorities? What's the way out?
I think one of the ways out is recognizing that we do have systemic issues, and a lot has to do with money, some has to do with race, but making sure that we address those issues beyond just writing a nice strategic plan and putting it on our website. Are you
No
laughing?
kidding. Well, I am laughing. I am laughing because I mean, my whole lifetime, all I hear about plans and programs and
Initiatives.
initiatives,
Yeah.
and you just wonder what happens to it all.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, it's exactly that. So making sure that when we say we want to do those things, that we enforce them. I think every year, every 5 years, we make a strategic plan. My university is making one. My college is making one. The College of Education is making one. It's good to have them. But the test is making sure that we enforce things. So if we want to recruit good teachers, making sure that we have what makes a good teacher and going out and recruiting them. If we want to make sure that every child in Omaha has a mentor or something like that, or a laptop, we just have to make sure that we enforce it. Or else we're just wasting money on really good printing and a really good website.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
At
means
the time,
nothing. Yeah.
well, we're doing something.
Definitely,
right?
definitely.
Are we?
Yeah, definitely,
Yeah.
definitely.
But the ultimate conundrum is, in the end, how do we measure how we've done here? I mean, again, there's always going to be people struggling,
Definitely. Definitely.
So it is difficult to
It's definitely
ascertain progress, isn't it?
Definitely. It's definitely difficult to measure progress and all of that. I think, though, when you see disparities, addressing those disparities, you know what I mean? Like if you see that such and such percentage of students are not graduating, addressing that issue, because every working adult knows that that diploma matters. Even if you choose not to go to college, that matters. So let's just say Omaha made that their initiative. We want our children, every last one of them, to graduate. Even if college is not going to be the option for them, making sure that they have that. So identifying the weaknesses and the loopholes is probably the best way that I think that progress can be made. But I think the issue is, like I said, is recognizing that it is a problem. Recognizing that when you see these numbers, it's like, 70% isn't bad, but yeah, that's 30% of people that is not graduating. Having a real gut check about some of the numbers and going after those.
So I'm assuming you feel like there are way too many people who don't recognize the disparity in the problems. I mean, do we all know it and don't care, or do we? We kind of addressed this earlier.
Yeah, we kind of did. I think I think apathy is probably the biggest issue. Like, I think some people just don't care. I do think that we can selectively not see things. I do think that is also a reality. But that comes in how you view humanity. Do you see the person that doesn't look like you as a person? Or do you see the person that doesn't
as a problem?
As a problem. And that will determine whether or not you think this is an issue. For some people, this is exactly how life should be.
Well, let's be honest. Racism is largely about looking at that group of people and saying, well, it's their fault.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, they should have just went out
Yeah,
and
they're just not motivated.
got a job.
And all the stuff I hear about their disadvantage, if they really were motivated, they would get it done.
Yeah,
right?
definitely, yes. I've heard bootstraps in enough PhD level meetings where people in different conferences, academic things that I go to, where people still have that belief. Even when we are paid and trained to look at the numbers and research, a lot of people feel like at the end of the day, you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps.
But let's go back to the 17-year-old, and you've got them, and you're trying to talk them into staying in school, and they give up, and
Yeah.
so then they have given. There is no motivation at that point. So there are some people for whom that is true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
And once you lose them, you aren't going to get them back, right?
Definitely. A lot of students that I taught in Atlanta are now in their 20s, but right around that transition, a lot of students, it was easier to get a GED and then try to work, or they, were looking towards getting a GED, et cetera. But yeah, I lost a lot of them, either to incarceration or death, or just different things. I lost a lot of them. I think out of my, this is tough. I think out of my, how many students did I have? 100 and 200 students. I might have had less than 10 probably went to college.
Wow.
So it's tough. And this is inner city Atlanta, where life is hard. You know what I mean? There are realities that I've never had to experience, and it's tough. But getting a job in that sense meant more to them. And so a lot of them are working. They are valuable members of society. They chose to work.
But they're having tough lives.
Tough, yeah. It's tough.
Well, and then the other thing that, at least from my point of view, is encouraging in terms of maybe a way out, partial way out, is recognizing that college is not necessary. How about we do more job training, career training,
Definitely.
Even if you haven't finished high school, even if you don't have your GED, find something that you're interested in, and we'll provide a way to equip you to do it.
Definitely.
There's a lot of that going on.
Definitely.
Metropolitan Community College.
Absolutely, which is why it's so important, which is why community colleges and any type of vocational program, even outside of that, is important. I think giving students those options, though, that's not a reality in a lot of districts either. You have a high school with 3,000 students. You're not going to have a career vocational program coming out to recruit you, that kind of thing. It's just, if you don't pass the test, you can drop out or leave, that kind of thing. But having access to that information early, I think, is important, because a lot of students, I don't see laziness as an issue for many of the students that I've interacted with. It's just unengagement. This stuff is not going to help me, like I said, pay my mother's light bill. So if that's the issue, and you don't mind working, there are plenty of vocational programs out there. I definitely think getting a high school diploma, though, is something that every child should have.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to keep that job, that $10 job. If you want to work,
yeah, we can put you in a career.
We can put you in career training and double your income.
Definitely.
Now that would be motivation.
Definitely, yes. And especially if it's short term. That's the thing. We lose them when it's long term. We lose them when it's a 4-year commitment to college. How am I going to pay for that, first of all? And what is studying astronomy going to do for my life? That kind of thing. But if I can say in 90 days, in 3 months, you can have a career vocational program, that would retain a lot of students.
And you can do that. I mean, there are
You
some
can't beat
programs.
money. Yes, you can't beat money.
So I think I asked you a while ago, how do we fix all this? I mean, that's one thing we can do, right?
Yeah, college and career readiness is an issue. Making sure that we have good teachers beyond just qualifications, but just compassionate teachers who understand kids who may not look like them, I think is important, because an engaging teacher, like I mentioned, is something that makes a difference in a child's life.
Well, because you talk about urban education.
Yeah.
And the unique needs that urban students have in terms of what they need from their teachers.
Yeah, definitely. And those are some things that urban education students need. But an engaging teacher, culturally relevant curriculum, which is basically making sure that the things that kids are learning about has a direct application to their life. And you could do that with any subject, just making sure that it's not some dry, stoic lesson that you're going to teach and they'll never see it again.
We ought to be doing that for every student.
We should, absolutely. And that's something that works for all students, a good teacher. For a lot of urban students, a mentor, someone who they can see outside of their parents who they may not want to talk to. Or for students, there's 1.3 million students who don't have parents. So making sure that there's an adult presence in their life where they can see something that they may have never seen before is also important. So yeah, there are things that research-based are effective. We just have to make sure that we enforce them for all students.
But here you are in your profession. You're keenly aware of what the problems are. You'd like to get them solved. You're out speaking. You're back home at Metropolitan Community College. Is that a recipe for just a lifetime of frustration if we don't have a different kind of attack on all this? Like, is it possible that there could be a plan drawn up that would remedy all this and fix it eventually, or is that
I think it's
pie in the sky? Or
I definitely think that professors and researchers like myself do sign on for a lifetime of disappointment and just frustration because all you're researching problems and proposing solutions and hoping that legislators pay attention to them. So it's a lifetime on a hamster wheel. But I definitely think that there are initiatives that can be drawn up on a national level or state, however people want to do it, that could address these issues. I think it's a continuing process. I think there's several probably proposals that can be drawn off over a lifetime that would help to fix these issues. I choose to believe there is hope. Not all professors do.
But do you have, when you sit and dream, maybe even unconsciously, what would that proposal look like?
Ooh. I would propose that this is that anything goes in this dream. Mm-hmm. I would propose that we recruit teachers like we do athletes and go out and scout good, promising people to teach our kids. That would probably be my dream reality, and we'd have to pay them, of course. But that would be dream number one. I would dream up that the curriculum is relevant to children, and there are different examples out there, but making sure there's multicultural, making sure that we're not still teaching these same tired people, that we teach kids the classics, but also make sure we embed new voices that they'll pay attention to, put pop culture in it. If we're going to teach about fractions, why can't we put a different word problem that involves a famous pop singer in it? Different things that kids would pay attention to. Making sure that the curriculum is rewritten to be engaging, so that would be the second one. And what would be my third thing in my
Recruit
proposal?
teachers, make the subject interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
beyond interesting, relevant and dynamic.
Yeah.
Not so tired and old.
Definitely. And I think I would revise the discipline policy. Some of the ways, the subjective ways that kids get kicked out of school. I would revise some of that.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
What's
we can.
going on that you don't like?
So most students are suspended, and they end up dropping out because they've been suspended so much, but are suspended for subjective reasons. A lot of black and brown students. So a lot of our black and Latino males are suspended for really subjective reasons like non-compliance or classroom disruption. Slouching. There was a child that was suspended on the East Coast for burping. I mean, he was expelled. And that was the crazy. He was expelled because he disrupted the class so loud for burping. That kind of stuff. So, and that was an extreme example. But a lot of our boys in general, black, brown, poor white boys, are suspended for just being really a nuisance to what the teacher wants in a classroom, not because they don't deserve to be there, or not because
pull those pants up.
Yeah, or uniform. That's next on the list. Uniform or skipping class, different things that are solvable. Kids are often suspended for, and it's not because they shouldn't be in class or that they're causing any harm to any child. Now I know what it's like to be a teacher, and I will always defend teachers. I know what it's like to have kids who are difficult in class. But we have got to look at school discipline in a civil rights way. We can't push kids out by always suspending them for doing things like asking a question too loud. You disrupted my class, go home for 2 days. That kind of thing. That's a crime against humanity. It is. It's a crime against kids. You can't do that. So I would definitely revise discipline policies. And if I would make it to where if you are not impeding on the safety of students, you should not be suspended for petty things like that. Because that pushes kids out. That is a bona fide way to prison.
Yeah. And yet, like you said, teachers have a tough job.
They do. I'm very pro-teacher. I'm tough on them as well. But yeah, they do have a tough job. I know what it's like to have trouble-making students who are just always pesky or playing. I did middle school, so playing pranks and all of that. So I know what that's like.
That's why you got out of it, right?
I still like middle school, though. The school I mentioned with the laptops is a middle school. I still like it.
Well, if we don't change some of the realities of education, how exacerbated are the problems going to be because of the demographic changes going on? I mean, this is not a white middle-class country anymore.
So the population is changing. The census, U.S. Census statistics suggest that by 2020, the majority is going to flip. And by 2060...
That's 2 years from now.
I know. By 2060, which is 40 years from that, the minority population will be at 64%, minority kid population. And then
At which point we can't say minority anymore.
Exactly, we'll be majority.
Yeah.
So our classrooms are diversifying, and so and immigration is increasing, and even things like biracialism by 2060 is expected to grow by 225%. So our classrooms will be browner. I mean, I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah.
It'll be browner, and so there's a good chance that teachers will be teaching kids that don't look like them. So making sure we always practice cultural competency and making sure that teachers have the tools that they need to teach kids who are different than them. And if we do not correct some of these problems, we'll have full prisons. Not because the kids are brown, but because we'll have teachers who may not understand them. We may have, we'll have increased income disparities because of some of the stipulations on where kids live. And yeah, we'll have full prisons and empty classrooms if we do not teach teachers to teach children who don't look like them, and if we do not address systemic issues that keep kids separated, divided, and without resources.
Yeah, that's great stuff. And that gets back to recruiting teachers,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, or creating teachers.
Definitely.
And you know, the reality is, you talked about these white teachers can't relate or don't.
Yeah.
So how do we get more minorities as teachers? Because that would address that.
That would address some of it. And I want to say this: I don't think race is indicative of good teaching. Some of my best teachers in Omaha were white, but and some I'm sure there are horrible black teachers all over the U.S. So I think good teaching, though, regardless of race, I think we have to recruit just top talent out of schools, and I think that's a lofty dream because that's going to be expensive to do that. I think a good teacher is someone who can understand their children even if they don't look like them, and to see the human condition in all kids, and to just want to ignite their imaginations and to teach them well. I think subject material matters, but I definitely think your ability to relate to kids and to talk to them in a way that they understand it matters even more. So yeah.
Okay, so we're running out of time here. Have I not asked you anything that you want to share?
I think you asked it all. You did good.
Yeah.
I think you hit everything.
Well, so what are we going to do to solve all this in 1 minute?
Yeah.
I've asked you a couple different ways. Where do we begin, and how do we make progress here?
I think we call out the problem and be intentional about how we address systemic issues. I think we should recruit good talent, and I think we should realize the humanity in all people. That's for people who go to schools that don't look like you. That's for the kids in your classroom that you may not understand, and realize that they deserve a chance to get a high school diploma and to have a good education, not to just be shuffled around in an underperforming school.
Very good.
Yeah.
So how long has it been since you've been back here?
I was here in 2015 for my 10-year high school reunion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, welcome back.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
It's
you.
been really interesting.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us again on Metro and More. Our goal is to better acquaint you with the mission, leadership, and the reach of the college. I'm Kent Pavelka for Metropolitan Community College. If you have comments or questions about the program, please email us at metrovision@mccneb.edu. Thanks for watching.
This has been a MetroVision production produced by Metropolitan Community College.